Rome, the eternal city, its streets whisper with history, its walls stand as monuments to ambition, and every stone bears the weight of centuries. For nearly 1,000 years it ruled the known world, shaping empires, kings and civilizations yet to come. But before Rome was an empire, before it was a kingdom, before it was even a city, it was a story. A story of brothers and betrayal, wolves and war, gods and mortals. A story that begins long before Romulus and Remus were born. A story of which its foundation can be traced back onto a wooden horse entering Troy. This is the greatest tale Rome has ever told. Rome's destiny was written long before its first stones were laid. The gods had set its fate into motion centuries earlier, when a Trojan prince named Aeneas fled the burning ruins of Troy. Carrying his father on his back and guided by his mother, the goddess Venus. Aeneas journeyed across the Mediterranean, surviving storms, wars and the wrath of Juno, before finally reaching Italy. There he established Lavinium, and his son Aeneas later founded Alba Longa, the city that would give birth to Rome's first kings. A prophecy from Jupiter himself foretold that from Aeneas' bloodline, a great empire would rise, an empire without an end. Generations later, in Alba Longa, a princess named Rhea Silvia was forced into a life of celibacy. Her uncle, King Amulius, had stolen the throne from her father Numitor, and feared that any child she bore would one day overthrow him. To prevent this, he made her a vestal virgin, bound to remain childless or face death. But fate could not be stopped. The war god, Mars, came to Rhea Silvia in the dead of night. Whether through love or force, she became pregnant with twins. When Amulius discovered this, he ordered their deaths. The newborns, Romulus and Remus, were placed in a basket and cast into the Tiber River. But the river, instead of claiming them, carried them safely to the banks of the Palatine Hill. Some say the river god, Tiberinus, himself guided them to safety, ensuring they would fulfill their destiny. And there, a she-wolf found them. Or did she? Ancient sources debate the truth. Was the wolf real, or was lupa, which also meant prostitute, a reference to a human woman? Could a shepherd's wife, Larentia, have been their true savior? One thing was certain, the twins were destined to survive. After being saved by the she-wolf Lupa, the boys were brought to the farm of Faustulus, where he and his wife Larentia would take care of the boys. While growing up in the countryside, the boys learned how to hunt and fight. The abilities they learned from hunting and boxing is something that they would use to protect the people in their town and surrounding areas from vicious thieves. These acts would make the boys very popular and respected by the town folk. Besides making them popular, their acts of bravery would inspire more young men to step up and fight for the safety of their land. Romulus and Remus would organize these young men into small bands under their leadership. Now that the bandits faced an organized group of young men, it became more difficult for them to rob the town folk. Because of this, the bandits would make a plan to capture both Romulus and Remus during the upcoming celebration of the Feast of Pen. The bandits must have thought, if we cut off the head of the snake, the rest of the body will die. During the festivities, the bandits attacked and managed to capture Remus and bring them to King Amulius, who was the same Amulius that tried to kill the boys when they were young. When the bandits arrived at King Amulius' court, they would proclaim that Remus was the leader of a group of bandits that were plundering his lands. King Amulius believed them and decided to lock Remus up inside of Numitor's estate. During his time in prison, Numitor would question the boy about his life, parents and heritage. Thanks to the answers Remus gave, Numitor realized who he was, but would keep the thought to himself. For now. While Remus was serving his prison sentence, Faustulus decided it was time to tell Romulus who the boys really were. When Romulus learned about the misdeeds of his uncle, he gathered a force to free Remus, inform him and take their revenge. To Romulus' surprise, he would meet his brother on the road to Amulius' estate. Numitor set Remus free when he realized who he was, and Remus gathered a group of men. The brothers unified their forces and successfully attacked Amulius' estate, killing the king and making Numitor again the king of the land. The Numitor would inform all the nobles of the land what Aeneas had done to the twins and how they stole the throne from him. Now that the boys learned that they were of divine and royal blood, they decided that they were not gonna wait until the crown came to them, but they were gonna shape the destiny to their own will. The two brothers had decided that they were gonna build their own city, close to the place where they were raised. The search for a perfect place to build a settlement would bring them to the Tiber River. While looking at the landscape, Remus said that the Aventine Hill would be a perfect place to build, because the land was less steep. Romulus would disagree with this plan, and said that the Palatine Hill was a better place, because it was closer to the place where the she-wolf Lupa saved the boys. The second point of disagreement came when the boys had to decide who was gonna be the ruler of the land. Both of the brothers wanted to be the king, and both of the brothers wanted to build a city in a different place. To find a solution for these problems, they went back to their grandfather Numitor to ask for his wisdom. Numitor told them to contact the gods and search for a sign to see which plan the gods preferred. To find their answer, the brothers would use an ancient religious practice named augury, which meant observing the behavior of birds to find an omen. While they were observing, the boys would see 6 vultures above the Aventine Hill and 12 above the Palatine Hill. Remus would then claim that he won because they first saw 6 vultures above the Aventine. But Romulus would disagree and say that he had won because even though the vultures arrived later at the Palatine Hill, he had 12 vultures, double the amount of Remus. This argument would turn into a bloody fight between the brothers, in which Romulus would slaughter his brother Remus, making him the first king of Rome. Romulus respectfully buried his brother and set out to build a city. Romulus and his followers would build the first walls and houses of the city. To guarantee that the city could be managed, Romulus created laws and adopted the Etruscan style of government. In this system, Romulus would be the king and receive counsel and advice from 12 lictors. The city of Rome was growing, but there was one problem, and that was the future of the city. Rome had no women, which would mean that the city would die after 1 generation. To fix this issue, Romulus decided to send emissaries to the neighboring cities, with the request of marriage arrangements between his men and their women. These potential marriages would give Rome the next generation and also alliances with its neighbors. To Romulus' surprise, the cities declined and even disrespected the emissaries, which was something that angered the Romans. Romulus couldn't accept the outcome, and he was not gonna let the dream of Rome die after just 1 generation. He was gonna make a plan, and this plan involved great games and festivities, for which he would invite all the neighboring cities. Rome's neighbors would respond and arrive with masses at the festival. Once they were all there, the men of Rome would capture the women, and Romulus would say that all of this could have been prevented if you just treated us with the dignity and respect we deserve. But I promise you that we, the Romans, will treat your women with the dignity and the respect they deserve. After arriving back at home, the families of the women that got captured were filled with rage and anger. With their minds set on revenge, they went to Titus Statius, king of Sabine, and told him what happened. They expected that their king would act fast and raise an army to rescue their daughters, but when the families noticed that it was not going fast enough, they decided to do it themselves. A combined force of neighboring tribes of Rome attacked the Romans, but the tribes were badly organized, and thanks to this, Romulus could change the tide and not only defeat the armies, but also capture their lands. When the Roman soldiers were looting the lands, Romulus' wife Hersilia, who was also the daughter of King Titus Statius of Sabine, confronted Romulus and begged him to spare her people. Romulus agreed, as long as her people would join the Roman kingdom. The people accepted Romulus' demand and became part of Rome. Rome had grown, but King Titus Statius was still looking for revenge. The king organized a group of soldiers and managed to bribe one of the women of Rome to let the army slip inside of the gates so that they could capture the citadel. When the Romans realized what was going on, they attacked King Titus and his army. The Romans had a good start, but this all changed when Titus' men managed to kill the army chief of the Romans. His death caused the Romans to retreat from the battle. When Romulus saw what was happening, he rushed towards his men, waving his sword in the air and screaming, "The supreme god Jupiter is with us. We will have our victory." This inspired the Romans, who managed to get the momentum back in the battle. The men were winning, but the women of Rome were watching a massacre in which their husbands, fathers and brothers were killing each other. The women couldn't handle it anymore and rushed to the battlefield to create a human wall between the men and scream to them that they would rather die than see their husbands, fathers and brothers kill each other. Thanks to these actions, the men decided to make a peace deal, in which the Sabines would become part of the Roman kingdom, and Titus Statius would rule as co-ruler next to Romulus until his early death. After the death of Titus Statius, Romulus became yet again the one and only ruler of Rome. During his rule, Romulus managed to create a prosperous society in which the people would love and respect him. 4 years, Romulus reigned as a king, expanding Rome's power, but then, one day, he vanished. The legend says that during a great storm, while dressing his men, Romulus was lifted into the sky by a whirlwind and disappeared. Some say he was taken by the gods, transformed into the god Quirinus. Others whispered a darker tale. The senators, fearing his growing power and tyranny, murdered him in secret, tearing his body to pieces and hiding the evidence. Perhaps both versions are true. Perhaps Rome itself had outgrown its founder. And so Romulus, the first king of Rome, was gone, but Rome remained. The story of Rome's founding is one of divine favor, ambition and blood. A tale of how a city born in violence rose to rule the world. Was it history? Was it myth? Or was it something in between? What we do know is this: Rome endured. Its foundation myth, like the city itself, became eternal. Join us next week, when we will learn how a young boy from the dry and brutal steppes of Mongolia will rise up to become one of the greatest warlords in history. Until then, I'm the Chronicler, reminding you to like, subscribe, and remember that history is written in mystery.